So, is religion for dumb people? I mean, I hear that all of the time, right? Like, the only reason to believe in God is if you can't explain the world around you and you need some kind of explanation. So, you just make up this creator God, and then you're like so weak minded that you're able to actually trick yourself into that thinking that it's actually real and you dedicate your life to it. That's what religion is, apparently. I don't think so. I think that that's kind of reductive. And I'm here making this video and really this entire channel and this whole platform, Molecular Apologetics, to discuss why I don't think that religion is for dumb people. Okay. Right? But I wanted to make this video to kind of go through not my testimony, but just a logical cascade that brought me from atheism to believing in Christianity. And I understand that, let's look at this little cascade here. I understand that going from atheism to Christianity is a long way, right? There's several steps between this, to deism, to theism, to monotheism, to seeking, revelation, to finally understanding and accepting and truly believing in the Christian tradition. And this isn't just like Christianity. This is believing that there's a personal, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent creator God that actually intervenes in the universe and revealed himself through the person Jesus Christ in the first century. It's a long way to go, and I want to kind of give this overview really quickly, going through some of these arguments to go from atheism all the way to Christianity. Okay, so we're going to start here with our current belief system being atheism and start to challenge some of the core claims. So what are the core claims of atheism, right? Well, obviously, there's no God. That's what atheism is. There's no God. And really, a lot of people now know that atheism is kind of dumb. Like we believe that there's no God, right? That's not what they normally will say. They'll say, we don't know. But they do believe like there's no creator, right? That's the core tenet of atheism. There's nothing outside of the universe. If there's no creator, though, the universe didn't begin to exist. But we know the universe exists, though, right? Which means the universe must be eternal. And they will claim this. The universe is eternal. Okay. Is this even possible? Really, can the universe actually be eternal? When we start to actually think about these things, I don't think that it is. There are several points of evidence that we can point to, or several pieces of evidence that we can point to. One of those, though, I think can be drawn out through looking at thermodynamics and entropy. Okay, so if we look at the universe, here's the universe. We know, because of modern cosmology, and thank you, Edwin Hubble, that as time progresses, the universe is expanding. Okay, and as the universe expands, the distribution of mass and energy is not even. Okay, we get these like pockets of energy all over the place, energy and mass. And then we have pockets of empty space, or now what we know as dark matter. Okay, but we know that the universe is not homogeneous. It's how we get things like galaxies and planets and stuff. But we also know, and the modern, standard model of cosmology basically proves that we are approaching this time period where the energy will be evenly distributed. And we call this heat death. And it's kind of weird that we call it a heat death because it kind of gives this idea that we're all going to like explode in a fiery explosion. Really, it's the opposite. It's like the lack of heat. And it's just because the energy is so dispersed, it's kind of like stirring up a cup of salt water. And when you start to stir the salt water, there's salt in certain places and there's like less salt in some places, but the more and more and more and more you stir, the salt becomes evenly distributed and you just get a big glass of salt water, right? We're approaching this with the universe. And at this point, life cannot exist. Really, nothing can exist. It's just going to be an even distribution of energy and mass, and you can't get stars. You can't get really anything. So if we're approaching this, but the universe is eternal, according to atheism, then time extends infinitely into the past, okay? The problem is that if time extends infinitely into the past, then enough time should have passed for us to reach heat death. If it's only a matter of time to reach this, and there's an infinite amount of time behind us, then we should have reached heat death by now. But I don't think that we have. I'm here. I'm sitting here, right? So like we're not here yet, which means that time can't extend into the past infinitely, which means that time had a beginning. And if time had a beginning, then the universe had a beginning. And if there's a beginning of the universe, then the universe began, right? And because the universe can't start itself, right? Like things can't beget things. This phone case didn't create this phone case. That's an illogical thing. We know that something outside of the universe must have started it, just by definition, because of thermodynamics. And if something outside of the universe started the universe, then something outside of the universe must exist. It's by definition. I have to accept this intellectually, being intellectually honest with myself. I have to accept that something outside of the universe must exist, which means that I'm no longer an atheist. And now I'm at least some kind of deist that believes that something is out there. I don't know what it is, okay? So let's move on from atheism. Now we're sitting at deism. But the next question is, does deism make sense? And really, the question here is between a force and a being. Is this God thing that created the universe a force, like an impersonal force, or is it a personal entity being that has autonomy? Well, let's look at these claims here. If it's a force, this force would have created the universe by default. It doesn't have autonomy, and if it's just like a reaction, then as the force came into existence, at that same time, the universe would have came into existence. But we just established that this force has to be outside of time, which means that it's eternal. So if this force didn't create the universe by choice, it just did it. Like when water reaches 0 degrees Celsius, it just freezes. It doesn't choose to freeze. It just does. It's a reaction. Then if this force is eternal, then the universe would also be eternal. But it's not. We just established that, right? So deism doesn't really make sense. However, if this God thing is an actual autonomous being that has will and can make decisions and can choose to make the universe by choice, then this makes sense that the universe could have had a beginning. Okay? So again, I only am going where the evidence and the logic leads. Now I have to be a theist. And in particular, I have to be a monotheist because this being has to be singular, at least in purpose, unified in purpose. Otherwise, you would have, if you had competing forces creating the universe, we wouldn't expect to see unified laws that are governing the universe. And it's just what we observe in the universe. The observable universe makes more sense if it was created by a singular entity than multiple entities with competing interests. So logically, and there's more to this, I'm kind of skipping over some details, but logically, I have to be no longer a deist because this doesn't make any sense. I have to be a monotheist. Okay. And this next step is where it gets kind of dicey because now that we can say, okay, there must be some kind of monotheistic entity out there that's beyond space and time and matter that created the universe by choice, and then the universe has a beginning. Are we able to know what this thing is? Like it's there, we don't, but it's possible that it's just hidden. Okay. I don't think that makes sense. Okay. But the question becomes now, is revelation possible? Are we able to know God? Can we know it? Can we know what it is? Now, a lot of people will defer to our asking the question as evidence that we have the ability to know it, right? If God exists and created the universe, then God created us, and God created our ability to ask these questions and seek Him. And I think that C.S. Lewis was the one that said that we experience hunger because food exists. We experience thirst because water exists, and we experience our longing for God because God exists, and we long for God. And that hunger, quote unquote, can be satisfied because God lets us know Him. Okay. There are some arguments that are kind of convincing to suggest that this seeking God, like human beings have sought God all throughout history all over the world, and it points to something deep within our psychology. A lot of people will kind of resort to an evolutionary argument that says that as humans evolved and we gained our high intelligence, one of the byproducts of our high intelligence was self-awareness. Okay, and if we have self-awareness, then we can understand our own certain death, and that would be very bad. we would experience despair, and we would maybe resort to destructive behavior like suicide. And in order to counteract that, evolution had to simultaneously endow us with some kind of suppressant of that despair, and that suppressant of the despair is religion. We have just our psychology draws us towards something transcendent to help us deal with our transient nature. I'm not going to go into all the arguments again. I had a thing here that I was going to talk about with evolution, and how it's weird how that evolution really only cares about us in the reproductive years of our life, which for humans it's around like mid to late teens to mid to late 30s ish. Okay, that's like the prime reproductive years, and evolution only has a vested interest in reproducing, right? So it's weird that right at our reproductive years, if evolution endowed us with this seeking of God and this religious tendency, why is it that right around our reproductive years we gain independent thinking, and a lot of people kind of resort to atheism around this point? This might be a consequence of modern society. Okay, so I don't want to draw too much on this, but it is interesting to see that a lot of younger people right in these years tend to drift towards atheism and away from theism. So if evolution was really driving us towards God, it's weird that right around this time we're drawn away from God. And this is kind of seen in a lot of data. This is a study from 2006, I think, that showed that younger people tend to attend church way less than older people. But this does seem to be kind of a modern phenomenon. So I don't want to draw on this too much. Okay. And the fact that humans take care of our children later in life. So reproduction also extends later in life because we have to raise our children for a long time. And later in life, we experience a lot of life events, okay, like having children, getting older, and it's possible that our psychology kind of kicks in then, and a lot of people begin seeking later in life, okay? So there are some evolutionary, it makes sense evolutionarily that maybe our psychology has just kind of ingrained us with this seeking of God, but we already know that a God, a monotheistic, personal God, must exist, and there is one thing we can say. We can say that revelation is possible. It isn't impossible. There's no reason for us to think that God literally cannot reveal himself or itself, right? So revelation is possible. So we can at least say, okay, if we're monotheistic and revelation is possible, we should be seeking God. We should be seeking God. The question becomes, what would this revelation look like? Because there's a bunch to choose from now. If God can reveal himself, it's possible that it already has, right? So what would it look like? And we can start to look at the current, smorgasbord of revelations and say, can we disprove these, right? Because in reality, this is an interesting point. I don't think that religious people, people who claim to have the real religion, the burden of proof is not on those people. It's actually on people who don't believe in it to prove that it's wrong. You can never prove that a religion is real. You can't prove that anything is real. I can't prove that I actually exist. And even in science, we don't actually prove anything. We just provide evidence that this is true. And one experiment could disprove everything that I've ever shown in lab. Albert Einstein even said with his theory of general relativity, one person could come along and disprove his theory, and then he's totally wrong. Even though if his theory lasts for 1,000 years, one person one day could prove it wrong. So the burden of proof really isn't on the person to prove that it's right. It's on everybody else to prove that it's wrong. So let's look at the current revelations and say, what should we expect this to, based on what we've gone through so far, what should we expect this to look like? And can we begin to rule out religions based on just illogical or logical necessity? So there's 4 characteristics that I think are necessary, and then one that's highly likely that God should be based on what we've done so far, just based on logic. The first one is that God's not changing. And it's not on here, okay, but God is unchanging. And we can go into why that's the case, but God's eternal. He is unchanging. It's unchanging. But then there's 4 other characteristics that we can use to start to rule out a bunch of different religions. And it's going to get kind of spicy here, so just bear with me. The first one is that God, must be singular, right? Because it can't be multiple entities. We already established that with monotheism. It must be personal. It can't be some kind of deistic, like spirit thing or force thing. We already got that. It must be immaterial, not bound by space, time, matter, or energy as we know it, because it's not a part of this universe, okay? And then finally, this is not necessary, but it's very likely that God is widely known. Okay, so if we know that these 4 things, or at least these 3 things, and probably this one, have to be true, then we can start to rule out certain religions. Okay, so let's start with singular. If God must be singular, we can rule out all polytheistic belief systems, which would include things like the Greek gods, the Norse gods, Hinduism, Mormonism, which Mormonism is polytheistic. Go look it up. Things like Shinto from Japan. Any polytheistic religion, it doesn't make sense. God must be singular. Okay, so all of these religions cannot be true based on that logic. Second, it's not a deity. It's a theistic being. So any kind of like spiritual, like universal force thing like Taoism and Jainism. Buddhism isn't necessarily theistic, but it's kind of close to that. So I put it in here too. But anything like this cannot be true. It must be a personal God creator that made the choice to make the universe. Okay, then this is a big one, immaterial. God cannot be bound by space or time. So it's nothing physical, which would be like sun worship, moon worship, Mother Gaia, earth worship, any kind of planetary worship, star worship, or things like animals. And this is like ancient Egyptian, the Aztecs. I think the Aztecs worshipped I forget, but anything that you're probably thinking of, like ancient religions, like worshiping mammoths and stuff, all ruled out because God cannot be bound by space and time. It's just a logical necessity. Okay. And then finally, widely known. What I'm meaning here is that it's probably not some esoteric thing that like God revealed himself to this very small cadre of people at one time. And now the people who got the revelation are just kind of keeping it secret. It's possible that that's the case, I guess, but it's highly, highly unlikely. If God is going to reveal himself to creation, I don't see a reason why he wouldn't do it to all of creation. So you can assume that God would be widely known. So if we can rule out all of these religions, what are we left with? We're left with the major, widely known, monotheistic, creator God religions, mainly Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And if you don't know, these 3 religions are kind of tied together. They're kind of like 3 chapters of the same book, sort of. Islam claims that it's a correction of the New Testament and the Old Testament errors. Christianity claims that it's a fulfillment of the law of Moses. So these are kind of tied together, but the important point here is that they're not the same. They make different claims, and they can't all be true, which means now we have to have a different filter to figure out, can we begin to rule these out? Because they might all be wrong, right? Like God doesn't have to reveal himself, but he can. They could all just be wrong, and we might not know who God is yet, right? And I think that a good test here would be, we can really start to look at the claims of the man, Jesus Christ. Okay? Jesus claims to be God all throughout the New Testament. And if you don't think that Jesus claimed to be God, I would ask you to go read the book of John, or go read any of Paul's epistles, or just think about, why did the Jews want to kill Jesus? They didn't kill prophets. They killed Jesus because he claimed to be God. Go and read John chapter 8. Okay. Jesus claimed to be God multiple times in the New Testament. Jews wanted to kill him, and the Muslims say that this is all just a fabrication and that actually Jesus was just a prophet. Okay, so these aren't the same things, and we can test this based on the claims of the man Jesus Christ. Now, if Jesus is wrong, then Christianity is not true. Okay, and Judaism and Islam, we can talk about some of the arguments for those, but if Jesus was wrong, then Christianity is not true. But if Jesus was right about what he was saying, he claimed to be God, if he was right, then Christianity is true. And this is the revelation of that God that we know has to exist and we know can reveal himself. Now, the question becomes, well, how do we know that what Jesus said was true? We could spend 50 years talking about these things, about the reliability of the New Testament, blah, 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 blah. But I want to draw on one man, and it's not Jesus. It's the Apostle Paul. Let's look at the Apostle Paul. Paul truly believed that Jesus was God, okay? And Paul was a zealous Pharisee. He was a devout Jew for his entire life, and he was killing Christians for years, okay? And then he claims to have had a divine revelation happen to him on the road to Damascus, and he had a earth-shattering, seismic shift, life transition, and he transitioned to Christianity. He converted to Christianity, and he was tortured, starved, stoned multiple times, imprisoned, shipwrecked, and then ultimately beheaded in Rome for his faith in Jesus. Why did he do that? Why did he do that? You have to either say that you need to deal with this reality. Either the New Testament is totally unreliable and the book of Acts can just be thrown out entirely. And if you're going to do that, then you really can't make any historical claims, because the New Testament is one of the most documented things in history ever. So if you want to discount the New Testament, you have to basically say like George Washington didn't exist, and things like Cleopatra didn't exist, Alexander the Great didn't exist. I mean, like there's things you need to start denying that like you don't want to deny. So the New Testament definitely like is recording real events, and the life, conversion, and death of Paul, there's no miracles there. So even if you want to say, the resurrection didn't happen, it's just like some kind of symbolic thing. None of this is miraculous. Paul converting to Christianity, and then Paul being martyred is not a miracle. Those things can happen according to like your worldview if you're an atheist. So why did Paul do it? Was he crazy? Doesn't seem to be the case. I mean, he was really smart. Go read any of his letters. He was not crazy, okay? Was he lying? No. He was beheaded, number one. Number two, he didn't gain anything. He was imprisoned, and he could have just stayed a Jew. Why didn't he just stay a Jew? If he was lying about it, what did he gain? There's no reason to think that he was lying about it. Okay, so he wasn't crazy. He wasn't lying. Was he mistaken? Did he make a mistake? I don't think so. He wasn't dumb, and he left the Jewish religion, which means that he thought that Jesus was God. He was extremely convinced that Jesus was God. I don't know what else to do with this. I have to take it seriously and be intellectually honest and say, I think that there's something going on here. And you have to do the same thing. And if you don't believe any of this stuff, I would just say, take these arguments seriously. If you don't agree, where don't you agree? Let me know in the comments and really tell me, like, I don't agree here. Maybe it's with the universe not being eternal because of quantum vacuums, or like some kind of like esoteric quantum physics appeal, because we don't understand quantum physics, and therefore it could have been that. That's an appeal to a black box. That's not evidence. That's just you trying to make an escape route for yourself. Really take these arguments seriously, and you get to this point, and I would say just go and read the book of John. Read the Gospel of John and take it seriously. And that's all that I would ask. Be intellectually honest, ask questions, and follow the answers to wherever they lead, even if it's uncomfortable. Okay, with that, I'll leave it there. Have a blessed day, and I'll see you in the next video.